Happy trails, Hans.
Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about Die Hard. Well, here I am the day after Christmas. I hope everyone had a good Christmas and good holiday season. I know I certainly did. If you guys have been following me, or to my subscribers who have been watching my videos regularly, you would know that this month I kind of had a theme of talking about alternative Christmas movies that are not traditional in terms of their genre, in terms of their storytelling, just kind of the outsider Christmas movies. And whenever the term alternative Christmas movies gets brought up, the number one film that gets mentioned is Die Hard, a film that is seen by most people to be a genuine Christmas classic. There used to be a debate back in the day. I think most people are like, who cares? Die Hard is a Christmas movie. It's a Christmas action movie that's fun to watch to break up the monotony of all the other traditional Christmas movies. Now, I wanted to talk about Die Hard this month, but I was like, what can I say about Die Hard that hasn't been said a million times? Yes, it is one of the definitive action movies of the 1980s. It's one of the greatest action movies of all time. Most people claim this movie to be their favorite action movie, and it's hard to argue with that. So I was like, well, I don't really know what I can say about this movie that hasn't been said a million times. So instead I talked about Die Hard 2, which became my most viewed video for this month and one of my most viewed videos ever with over 9,000 views, thanks to everyone who liked, subscribed, and watched that video. And I wanted to talk about Die Hard 2 because I'm like, well, that's the Die Hard movie that doesn't really get mentioned a whole lot, and it also takes place during Christmas. So I'm like, I'll talk about Die Hard 2 to kind of shed light on that movie, talk about why it's not as good as the first movie, but why I still think it's fun and a worthy watch, especially if you're an action movie fan. But I also mentioned in that video that I watch Die Hard every Christmas Eve, and that's what I did exactly 2 nights ago. I put on Die Hard like I always do, and I'm watching the movie, and I decide to watch it from a different perspective. I'm like, I've seen this movie a million times, but I've never really thought to myself, why is this movie in particular mentioned at the very top of action movies? What are the elements that makes it so much more superior than 90% of most other action movies? So I was watching the movie with that particular mindset, and I came to the conclusion that there is a certain timelessness that Die Hard has that separates it from a lot of the action movies of the time that it was made in the late 80s. And whenever a movie gets mentioned as being timeless, there are a lot of different factors, a lot of different elements that go into that. Performances is a big one. Anytime you see a film and the performances are amazing and they're captivating and they're engaging to the viewer, regardless of when the film is made, you don't even think about it. You're just so sucked in because the performances are so good. So that's a major factor. Performances is a big one. The look of the film, the cinematography, the visual aesthetic, these are also important elements in terms of how well a film has aged over time. If we're talking about an effects-heavy film, say, for example, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner or Stanley Kubrick's 2001: Space Odyssey, these are movies that are also considered timeless because visually they look so unbelievable that they put some newer movies in the similar genre to shame, and they just look insanely good, and they almost look better as they get older. It's actually kind of impressive. So that's another factor. So I'm watching Die Hard with that mindset, and I'm like, okay, I can now see why this movie in particular, outside of the fact that it's just entertaining as shit and the action is fucking awesome, I put all of those elements in my mind as I was watching the movie. I'm like, this is what makes Die Hard so amazing and why it's better than most other action movies, even by today's standards. So I was like, all right, if I'm going to talk about this movie, let's really dig in. I'm not going to talk about the stuff that everybody talks about. I'm not going to talk about how Die Hard influenced a million other action movies, because I already did that in my Die Hard 2 video, which I'll make sure to put in the description for anyone to see. I'm not going to talk about the plot of the movie, because honestly, if you haven't seen Die Hard by now, then you clearly just don't want to. Everybody knows the plot of Die Hard. I'm going to get more into the technical aspects. And as I was watching the movie, the first thing that came to me was the cinematography. I thought really stood out. The cinematographer of Die Hard is a man named Jan de Bont, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but he went on to direct Speed and the film Twister. But he started as a director of photography, and Die Hard is probably the most famous movie that he's worked on. And as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, wow, this movie still looks really good. Now, it's kind of hard to describe what makes Die Hard look so much better than other 80s action movies. Like, I'm a big fan of Lethal Weapon, but I can say visually speaking, and Lethal Weapon came out just a year before Die Hard. Die Hard came out in 88, Lethal Weapon came out in 87. And I love Lethal Weapon, I love the look of Lethal Weapon, but it is a film that looks very much like an 80s movie. The way it's shot, it's kind of conventional in that aspect. It's not a dig against the movie, but it does look like, okay, yeah, that's an 80s movie. You can just tell by the way it's shot, and then it's an 80s movie. You compare that to Die Hard, where the cinematography is there's a sleekness to it. There's a modern edge to the way this film looks in comparison to other 80s action movies at the time. There's a use of lens flares that really stand out in Die Hard. J.J. Abrams would be jealous. That kind of adds to the more modern aesthetic that this movie has. The way the camera pans around, very specific decisions made in terms of the framing of certain scenes. One scene that stands out to me, the way it's edited too. I mean, editing is a really big factor. The scene where John McClane jumps off the Nakatomi Tower as the roof explodes. He's got the fire hose wrapped around his waist, and he's swinging down. He hits the window, and he shoots at the window, and he breaks through, right? There's a really great camera moment where the camera's above John's head, and we see the fire hose wheel fall, and the camera pans down, and we see John McClane's face, and then he's getting pulled, and he's about to fall out the window. And just little touches like that. There's so many great camera movements, and there's a sleekness, there's an edge to the visuals of this movie that really make it feel timeless. And it's like, damn, it's such a good looking movie. And a lot of that has to go to John McTiernan, the director. You know, the director has a lot of input in terms of how they want certain scenes to be filmed. And John McTiernan is one of those filmmakers where he's made arguably, well, not arguably with some of them, but like 4 action movie classics. We're talking Predator, we're talking this film, Die Hard, we're talking Hunt for Red October, he directed that movie, and he directed Die Hard with a Vengeance. And due to some legal issues, which I'm not going to get into because they're very complicated, but I encourage people to look up and find out for themselves, he has not made a movie since, like, I think he did Rollerball or something like that. He made some movies in the early to mid 2000s, and then he just stopped making movies. With those action movies that I mentioned specifically, there's a visceral quality to it that really packs a punch, and that goes into the other aspect of why Die Hard feels so timeless, and that is the practical action. Obviously, this was made during a time where, you know, CGI was not really a thing quite yet, or if it was a thing, it wasn't fully developed to be convincing enough to movie audiences. And so pretty much everything you see in this movie, visually speaking, and special effects wise, is done practically. Real explosions, real guns firing, real blanks, real stuntmen falling and jumping and doing insane stuff. The action in this movie feels particularly grounded and realistic, and regardless of how many times I watch it, I'm just blown away by how so much of it feels so real, even though this is a very outlandish movie and it's very over the top in a lot of ways, but there is a grounded element because the action is done practically and it looks extremely convincing. That's another factor as to why I think this movie has aged so beautifully. So the direction, the cinematography, the editing, and the very grounded effects all contribute to why this movie still looks so awesome and feels like, you know, if you updated some hairstyles and you updated some of the technology that the characters had, this movie could come out today more or less and people would be like, damn, this movie is amazing. And I cannot forget to mention the performances. There is one thing that hardly ever gets mentioned when talking about Die Hard, and that is how fucking good Bruce Willis is in this movie. Now, don't get me wrong, Alan Rickman is another huge highlight to this film. He's one of the most iconic film villains of all time, Mr. Hans Gruber. And it's pretty impressive to learn that this was his first movie. Alan Rickman, before this, was a theater actor, but he came into this and he gave a performance that people are in love with to this day. Ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Bruce Willis, I mean, everybody's a fan of Bruce Willis. I mean, and in light of his recent news, it's been really tragic to hear what he's going through with his health, and I'm glad to see that he's in good hands with his family. But, you know, I've been thinking a lot about Bruce Willis ever since I heard that, and I've been rewatching a lot of his movies, and man, I know this is his most iconic film, but I think it might be his best performance too, and I'm going to point out a scene specifically. It's my favorite scene in Die Hard. It's one of my favorite scenes in any action movie ever, in any movie ever. I love this scene, and it is an element that, once again, shows just how forward-thinking and ahead of its time Die Hard was in comparison to most other 80s action movies. It's the scene where after John is walking on the broken glass, he's sliding into the bathroom and he's taking out the glass and he's talking to Al outside. The power then goes off and we see something in this scene that we don't really see in most action movies, especially action movies of this time. It just wasn't super common, and that is a vulnerability that our hero believes that they're going to die. And it's so John is like, I'm having a bad feeling up here. He's crying and he's telling Al, just tell my wife I'm sorry. I let her down.
Tell her that she's the best thing that ever happened to a bum like me. She's heard me say I love you 1,000 times. She never heard me say I'm sorry.
That is such an unbelievably powerful scene. It's a moment that when you see it, it's like, oh man, it just feels that much more real. This character is like, he is struggling, he is bleeding, he has a physical toll, and he's like, I don't know if I can get out of this. There's not really that many 80s action movies that do that. For the most part, Die Hard is like 90% pure escapism. But that scene where John McClane is vulnerable and he feels like he's going to die, and he talks to Al and he shows how much he cares and loves his wife. I mean, that elevates this movie to a whole other level for me. And it is such a brilliantly acted scene. Bruce Willis, and on top of that, outside of his Oscar moment, I guess you could call that scene, outside of that, he is just so goddamn charismatic, and the way he delivers one-liners, I mean, every 80s action movie has to have its one-liners, and arguably the greatest, most iconic 80s action one-liner of all time is,
"Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker."
And, other actors could deliver that line and it comes off as cheesy, but with John, it's just like, he's just so effortless with that charisma. And so when he delivers lines like that, it doesn't come off as cheesy or as forced. It's like, no, he would totally say that because he's a badass dude. He's an everyman. That's the other reason why Die Hard gets, so much praise, is that, in the 80s, in order to be an action hero, you had to either be a huge muscle-bound dude like Schwarzenegger or Stallone. You had to be a martial arts expert, whether you're Jackie Chan, Jean-Claude Van Damme, or you had to be like a rugged, intimidating looking dude like a Charles Bronson or a Clint Eastwood. Young Bruce Willis wouldn't really fall into any of those categories. He was the everyman. And seeing the everyman, not your standard 80s action hero archetype, go against these bad guys and, take them out, but also show vulnerability. I mean, these are all reasons why Die Hard still feels like a timeless classic. And on top of that, it is a Christmas movie. And I watch it every Christmas Eve, and I do so with a big-ass grin on my face with a nice ice-cold cup of eggnog, and it just fills my heart with joy. So anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on Die Hard. It's Die Hard. It's fucking Die Hard. Thanks for watching.